So I cannot tell you how pleased I am to introduce our speaker today. I first saw Severn speak as part of the Students' Union Revolutionary Speaker Series. I think it was in 2006. Was anybody here at that talk by any chance? Not very many. Guess I've been around a long time. I was a student at the time, and her words energized and inspired me so much so that it got me started down a career path as a sustainability educator that I'm on today. So Severn Cullis-Suzuki has been speaking up for what she believes in since she was small. Known as the girl who silenced the world for 6 minutes, Severn, daughter of David Suzuki, rose to fame after delivering a powerful speech at the 1992 Rio Earth Summit when she was only 12. For this, she received the UN Environment Programme's Global 500 Award, and her speech, found on YouTube, is still having an impact today, inspiring citizens around the world. In the 2 decades since Rio, Severn has advocated for intergenerational justice, fought for long-term sustainability, and for awareness of the fundamental interconnection between culture and environment. She studied ecology and evolutionary biology at Yale University, and achieved a master's in ethnoecology at the University of Victoria. In 2000, she and 5 friends carried out Power Shift, a cross-Canada cycling campaign to raise awareness about climate change and air pollution. And at the 2002 UN World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, South Africa, she sat on Secretary General Kofi Annan's Special Advisory Panel. And the list of her achievements and activities goes on and on. And now, joining us all the way from Haida Gwaii on the Pacific West Coast, please help me give a warm welcome to Severn.
Thanks, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Lisa. That was a wonderful introduction. It just really heartens me to know that I was part of your current path because you're excellent at your job. I would like to begin my presentation this evening with recognition and acknowledgement of the Treaty 6 First Nations, whose traditional territory we are on. And thanks to Lisa and Micheline and to the University of Alberta for welcoming me once again to Edmonton. I'm very honored to be taking part of the Sustainable Speakers Series. You have heard from some very important speakers, very important thinkers, and I'm absolutely honored to be on the roster. For most of my life, as Lisa said, I have been trying to advocate for societal change towards a sustainable way of living. I dedicated my youth to being a spokesperson for intergenerational justice, which is championing the idea that we are currently perpetrating justice and injustices towards future generations with our actions today. I was learning about what the science was telling us as I was studying biology in high school and then in university. And so I was advocating as a young person because I was hearing about the 6th mass extinction event, the first extinction event in the history of Earth that had been precipitated by a single species, us. And of course, climate change. I have engaged at a global level, attending Earth summits, conferences of the parties. I have tried my best as an engaged citizen, and my primary work has to be to engage people in this conversation, to talk about sustainability and try to figure out how we're going to get there together. I'm interested in solutions. And apparently, Edmonton and the University of Alberta are interested in solutions too. And I always feel this every time I come to this city. At City Hall today, I spoke at the Way We Green Speakers Series. And then while I was there, I actually learned that the Way We Green is actually a blueprint for getting Edmonton to being a sustainable city. It was quite impressive. And here at the University of Alberta, this weekend, the Office of Sustainability hosted the 4th annual Student Sustainability Summit. And reading the theme of this summit was extremely inspiring to me. The theme was Power and Prosperity, the relationship between energy systems and communities. As someone who doesn't live in Alberta, someone looking over at what you guys are up to, it is extremely encouraging and heartening to see that this is the kind of engagement that the students are having, that you are talking at this level about the issues that pertain to absolutely your province, but in fact to our entire country. Thank you. And on top of that, this is International Week at U of A, with the very inspiring theme of creating solutions for a healthier world. You guys are busy, holy. And I believe that we've come a long way on this conversation too. It's a reality that often in our multicultural celebrations and our international weeks in universities and high schools across the country, it's a reality that often our First Nations are forgotten when we are having these kinds of events. But here on Monday night, iWeek held an event called Closing the Gap, Improving the Health and Status of Aboriginal People in Canada. So here, International Week is not just about celebration, it's also about responsibility, and it's about the reality of being a Canadian family. So on that note, I'm going to start my slideshow. I have just a couple slides as a backdrop for while I'm talking. We are people who left our countries from all corners of the globe, and we came to a land with many nations, the First Nations here, and now we all live together. You can't choose your family members, as we all know, but you're stuck with them. And if we can all survive each other, our diversity makes us stronger and more resilient. And so here we are. All of us in this room, all of us in this country, we're inextricably linked by our shared Canadian history and in our shared ecological, social, and economic future. And understanding and appreciating these complex interconnections is a huge part of the work that we're going to have to do to negotiating a sustainable route for a healthy next generation. And the current major hurdle on the track to sustainability is, of course, energy. And that's part of why it's so exciting to be here in Edmonton. This city is the gateway to the north, to the oil sands, the largest human development project on the planet. What unfolds here, the search for solutions, for meaningful dialogue, the search for sustainability, for tackling the challenging questions that we are going to have to answer. What unfolds here is so critical to the degree of climate change that our entire planet is going to experience. Keystone XL, Northern Gateway, Kinder Morgan, these names are not just familiar to those in the industry. They are familiar to a growing body of the public. Suddenly, pipelines now are something that people in the mainstream are concerned about. It seems that we've reached a point in our history where we have to have this national conversation about energy, sustainability, our economy, and our values as a Canadian people. It's a big conversation. So, on this note of energy, because it's fun and I love this kind of animation, I'm going to take this opportunity to show you a 300-second video about the fossil fuel history from the Post-Carbon Institute.
It all started with a big bang. Wait, we don't have to go back that far. The Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago. No, still too far. Try this. It's the Middle Ages. People in Britain run out of firewood, start burning coal, but they use up the coal on the ground. Miners dig deep. Coal mines fill with water. Samuel Newcomen invents a coal-burning steam engine to pump out water so miners can keep digging. James Watt makes it practical for other uses. Now we have ingredients for the Industrial Revolution, fossil fuels, and a way to put them to work. All hell breaks loose. Coal miners bog down lugging coal. Rails make it easier. Rails and steam engine combined make a railroad. Michael Faraday makes the first electric motor. Nikola Tesla invents alternating current. Soon utility companies start burning coal to generate electricity. Meanwhile, Edwin Drake drills the first rock oil well in Pennsylvania, and Carl Daimler builds an automobile running on petroleum. Coal tar and oil are turned into industrial chemicals and pharmaceuticals that prolong life, more population growth. The Wright brothers start oil-fueled aviation. Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch make fertilizer from fossil fuels. Fertilizer and oil-powered tractors expand food production, feeding more people. World War I is the first fossil-fueled conflict. Then comes World War II, giving us guided missiles and atom bombs. In between is a Great Depression, partly caused by overproduction. Powered assembly lines make products faster than people need them. Advertising executives invent consumerism to soak up overproduction. It's the 1950s. Advertisers use television to hook new generations of consumers. In the 70s, there's an oil shock. Everyone's shocked to realize how dependent they are on oil. With the energy crisis, the environmental movement is born. But oil prices fall and everyone forgets energy shortages. There's a showdown between market and planned economies. Market wins. Goodbye, evil Soviet empire. Politicians decide the market will solve everything. Personal computers arrive. Globalization takes over when the market notices labor is cheaper in China. Suddenly everyone has a cell phone, but world oil production stalls out. China is now burning half the world's coal to make export products. But where will China get more coal and oil to fuel more growth? Environmental problems everywhere. Rising CO2 levels lead to record heat waves, floods, droughts. Oceans acidify. Topsoil erodes by 25 billion tons a year from industrial agriculture. Ancient forests disappear. Species go extinct at 1,000 times normal rates. Fresh water is scarce or polluted. Oil companies drill in miles of seawater because the easy oil is gone. But a deep water oil platform explodes and fouls the Gulf of Mexico. Manufacturing moves to polluting countries where labor is cheap, while the U.S. becomes a casino. The financial sector is 40% of the economy. But Wall Street is over-leveraged. Banks fail. Unemployment soars. Credit evaporates. The economy is on the verge of collapse. Okay, present time. It's amazing how far we've come in 200 years, just 3 human lifetimes, from the beginning of industrialism till now. But where are we headed? We can't keep doubling human population. We can't keep dumping carbon in the atmosphere. We can't keep ruining topsoil. We can't keep growing population and consumption or basing our economy on depleting fossil fuels. We can't just print more money to solve the debt crisis. It's been an exhilarating ride, but there are limits. Now, it's not the end of the world, but we have to do 4 things fast. Learn to live without fossil fuels, adapt to the end of economic growth as we've known it, support 7 billion humans and stabilize population at a sustainable level, and deal with our legacy of environmental destruction. In short, we have to live within nature's budget of renewable resources at rates of natural replenishment. Can we do it? We have no choice. Alternative energy sources are important, but none can fully replace fossil fuels in the time we have. Also, we've designed and built our infrastructure for transport, electricity, and farming to suit oil, coal, and gas. Changing to different energy sources will require us to redesign cities, manufacturing processes, healthcare, and more. We'll also have to rethink some of our cultural values. None of our global problems can be tackled in isolation, and many cannot be fully solved. We have to prepare for business as unusual. Our best goal is resilience, the ability to absorb shocks and keep going. If we do nothing, we still get to a post-carbon future, but it will be bleak. However, if we plan the transition, we can have a world that supports robust communities of healthy, creative people and ecosystems with millions of other species. One way or the other, we're in for the ride of a lifetime. Understand the issues and pitch in. It's all hands on deck.
So given the level of dialogue that you're having here, I'm not going to talk about climate change. I'm not going to talk about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that group of thousands of scientists from around the world under the auspices of the UN who research climate change for us and the overwhelming consensus in their scientific reports. I don't have to talk to you about 100-year floods in southern Alberta. Polls repeatedly show that Canadians and Albertans believe that climate change and the energy needs to be addressed. Great. Finally, we can get on to dealing with the actual issue at hand. Now we have to roll up our sleeves. Now we have to wade into the complexities of transforming a system that's been built up since the Industrial Revolution. So, shouldn't this be the work of our world leaders? I mean, shouldn't these guys be the ones that are making the transformation? Well, in 1992, I was 12 years old, and I had learned a little bit about democracy and how we elect our leaders through voting, and then they go and make important decisions to lead their nations. And I had a little club, the Environmental Children's Organization. We were a group of friends. We started in grade 5, and we wanted to learn about environmental problems. We did lots of local projects, and after a few years, we heard about the Earth Summit. And this was going to be the largest gathering of heads of state. They were going to talk about environment and development. This was riding the crest of interest of the public and politicians in the environment in the 1980s. And so this Earth Summit was going to address the major challenges of sustainable development, which was emerging as the major challenge of the 21st century, of the upcoming 21st century. From the incredible support of my community, my friends, my parents, our parents, my friends and I were able to go down to Rio. We were able to participate in the Earth Summit. And incredibly, I was able to address the world representatives at a formal plenary session of the UN Earth Summit. And so my next video is going to be of the speech I gave 22 years ago.
Hello, I'm Severn Suzuki, speaking for ECHO, the Environmental Children's Organization. We're a group of 12 and 13-year-olds trying to make a difference. Vanessa Setti, Morgan Geisler, Michelle Quigg, and me. We've raised all the money to come here ourselves, to come 5,000 miles to tell you adults you must change your ways. Coming up here today, I have no hidden agenda. I am fighting for my future. Losing my future is not like losing an election or a few points on the stock market. I am here to speak for all generations to come. I am here to speak on behalf of the starving children around the world whose cries go unheard. I am here to speak for the countless animals dying across this planet because they have nowhere left to go. I am afraid to go out in the sun now because of the holes in our ozone. I am afraid to breathe the air because I don't know what chemicals are in it. I used to go fishing in Vancouver, my home, with my dad, until just a few years ago we found the fish full of cancers. And now we hear of animals and plants going extinct, every day vanishing forever. In my life, I have dreamt of seeing the great herds of wild animals jungles and rainforests full of birds and butterflies. But now I wonder if they will even exist for my children to see. Did you have to worry of these things when you were my age? All this is happening before our eyes, and yet we act as if we have all the time we want and all the solutions. I'm only a child, and I don't have all the solutions. But I want you to realize, neither do you. You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. Here, you may be delegates of your government, business people, organizers, reporters, or politicians, but really, your mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles, and all of you are someone's child. I'm only a child, yet I know we are all part of a family, 5 billion strong. In fact, 30 million species strong. And borders and governments will never change that. I'm only a child, yet I know we are all in this together and should act as one single world towards one single goal. In my anger, I am not blind, and in my fear, I am not afraid of telling the world how I feel. In my country, we make so much waste. We buy and throw away, buy and throw away, buy and throw away, and yet northern countries will not share with the needy. Even when we have more than enough, we are afraid to share. We are afraid to let go of some of our wealth. In Canada, we live the privileged life, with plenty of food, water, and shelter. We have watches, bicycles, computers, and television sets. The list could go on for 2 days. 2 days ago, here in Brazil, we were shocked when we spent time with some children living on the streets. This is what one child told us. I wish I was rich. And if I were, I would give all the street children food, clothes, medicines, shelter, and love and affection. If a child on the streets who has nothing is willing to share, why are we who have everything still so greedy? I can't stop thinking that these are children my own age, that it makes a tremendous difference where you are born. That I could be one of those children living in the favelas of Rio. I could be a child starving in Somalia, or a victim of war in the Middle East, or a beggar in India. I am only a child, yet I know if all the money spent on war was spent on finding environmental answers, ending poverty, and finding treaties, what a wonderful place this earth would be. At school, even in kindergarten, you teach us how to behave in the world. You teach us not to fight with others, to work things out, to respect others, to clean up our mess, not to hurt other creatures, to share, not be greedy. Then why do you go out and do the things you tell us not to do? Do not forget why you are attending these conferences, who you're doing this for. We are your own children. You are deciding what kind of a world we are growing up in. Parents should be able to comfort their children by saying, everything's going to be all right. It's not the end of the world, and we're doing the best we can. But I don't think you can say that to us anymore. Are we even on your list of priorities? My dad always says, you are what you do, not what you say. Well, what you do makes me cry at night. You grown-ups say you love us, but I challenge you, please, make your actions reflect your words. Thank you.
After Rio, I went home. I started grade 8 I went to school, I played basketball, but I also kept involved at this UN level. And I attended more summits, more conferences. I went to Rio Plus 10, PrepComs for Rio Plus, Rio Plus 5, PrepComs for Rio Plus 10, Rio Plus 10 in Johannesburg. And as I was engaging at this level, I was gradually seeing that people were becoming more and more disillusioned with this process. And in Johannesburg, they called Rio Plus 10 Rio Minus 10, because already countries were starting to backtrack on the commitments that they'd made in Rio, where several legally binding declarations were made. I attended Rio Plus 20 in 2012. And everyone wanted to know, what's the difference? What has changed in 20 years? Well, a lot has changed in 20 years. And one of the huge differences from 20 years earlier is in the growth of the influence of corporations on politics. In 1992, in the first Rio, presidents and prime ministers had the power to make decisions on behalf of their nations, and they were more independent. Today, we live in a world where the revenues of corporations are larger than some countries' entire economies. If Walmart were a nation, it would have a GDP ranking around 25th in the world. It would be wealthier than over 150 nations. The largest corporations today are now more powerful than a large proportion of our planet's population. Yet corporations are not responsible to voters. They're not responsible to us. They are responsible to shareholders, and the bottom line is profit. And at Rio Plus 20, I realized, when I was looking at all of these world leaders together, unable to make real leadership calls for the sake of humanity. Here they were, all the people who were supposed to have the power given to them by the democratic process. And here they were, they could not do it. We have a crisis in governance where the world leaders can't lead for the good. Our globalized system and our focus on economic growth has eroded our democracy. So where does that leave us? Where is the responsibility? Is recycling and changing light bulbs and consuming responsibly, is that going to get us out of this mess? Well, of course not. Our human energy for change is far, far greater. And I'm happy to say that while leadership at on the international stage is nothing short of appalling, leadership at the community and municipal level is absolutely inspiring. And this is where we are confronting the challenges that are before us and to our future generations. Last year I attended EcoCity. This is an international conference that's held every 2 years in a different city each 2 years. And it's about sustainability in cities, how to get there, what people are doing, what cities are doing. And I was able to attend a few of the 100+ panels and workshops sharing information on how counselors are doing it, how organizers are doing it, how economists are making suggestions for municipalities and sustainable projects. And there I realized that Happyville, this is UK new economist Andrew Sim's imaginary sustainable city, Happyville does exist today. It exists. It's just spread out in elements of cities across this planet. It's in Ghent, in Belgium, where there are now more bikes than cars. It's in the dozens of community banks in Brazil that are springing up to support local currencies therefore promoting local economies. Along this line, it's also in Bristol, in the UK, where the mayor takes his entire pay in the local currency, the Bristol pound. You can pay your taxes in the Bristol pound, a local money. It's in my home city of Vancouver, where an exploding movement of urban farming is one of the hippest niches for young people to get involved in. It is so exciting to see this happening in my hometown. It's in New Delhi, where they took steps to ban plastic bags completely. It's in Havana, where urban farming has helped deal with starvation and health. And it's in Edmonton, where Canadians are on the front lines of actually figuring out what sustainability means for the future of our energy systems. And this brings us back to energy. It's not just activists and municipal leaders that are whispering about these coming changes, these small changes. Increasingly, it's economists who are starting to talk about the big changes coming to the status quo. Right now, Jeff Rubin is very active. He was formerly the chief economist at CIBC, and he's now the author of several books. And he is very confident that the cost of oil extraction is beginning to show investors where the future lies. And it is not in fossil fuels, as promised. And of course, we have a problem in the stranded assets of all the infrastructure we have invested. But he is confident that this will not be enough to keep us married to an unsustainable source of energy as the world begins to divest from fossil fuels. Tim Flannery, scientist and advocate, formerly head of Australia's Climate Commission. I'm very happy to know that he is an optimist. He sees the change that has surpassed his expectations. He says that everyone is looking to Germany, the success in the renewables mix they are building, and says that there is active debate in Australia about whether renewables could actually power the entire grid. The cost of renewables has come down far faster than anticipated. He says, we are in a period of rapid transition, and what is true today might not be true in 5-10 years. The price of coal has started to be affected as China has actually begun to make good on its announcement to cut down its use of coal. As it has to, because air pollution in northern China has begun to reduce the average lifespan by 5 years. So the conditions and the pressures for change are growing. How do we direct social change? What is the theory of change? What are our theories for change? Well, this is something that I've been asking my whole life. How do social movements happen? How does transformation occur? And I think it's an ongoing study, ongoing answers. But how society talks influences. The way that we talk, the way that we influence, the way that we interact with one another, this influences the direction of our societal possibility. And right now, our media is a major way that we hear these issues being talked about. And right now our media takes these important issues and boils them down to a false binary. And of course, we all saw this last week with the Honor the Treaties tour and the Neil Young media explosion. And it becomes us versus them. This framing does us a huge disservice. Because unfortunately and ultimately, we all have to work together. We're going to have to figure this out together. We are inextricably linked to each other. A couple months ago, a group of young men traveled to Haida Gwaii. They'd been traveling along the proposed Northern Gateway pipeline, the proposed Enbridge pipeline, and they'd been interviewing people along the route, the communities, and asking them all kinds of questions, how they felt about the proposal. And And they interviewed me as Haida Gwaii, an archipelago off the coast of Canada. It's just below the Alaskan panhandle. They interviewed people on Haida Gwaii, including myself, and the last question of the interview was, okay, if you could talk directly to the CEOs of Enbridge, what would you say? And I just kind of stared at them, and they said, okay, well, we'll go over here. You can just talk to the camera by yourself, because sometimes people get really mad and they jump up and down and they swear and they get really angry. And it just made me feel really sad to hear that, that kind of dialogue is what it gets reduced to. Because it's not about the CEOs of Enbridge. It's the system that has created this problem, and together we have to navigate it. We all drive cars. We all are totally enmeshed in this system. And together, because we are enmeshed in it, we have to ask questions about it, because it is us. We are all part of this together. We can't become enraged at another part of it, because we are completely linked. And I'm emphasizing this because I really see this as a key part of us moving forward. I can't do the angry yelling back and forth anymore. It's just ridiculous. So how we talk influences, and also how we walk does influence. And over the years, I've gone back and forth between thinking, yes, it's up to the world leaders. We need help. We need standards. We need guidance. We need help. And then going to the other side of saying, well, it's up to the consumer. It's up to us to start growing the change with our actions. And it's true. I've come to realize that all of our lives and the choices that we make in our daily lives and in our daily conversations, they ultimately do affect the direction that we're going. And I see this perhaps more because now I live in a very small community. In my village of Skidegate, where I live now, which is on Haida Gwaii, there's 1,000 human beings that live in this town. And so you can see how every person makes a difference, for good and also for not so good. We all definitely have an effect. And actually, we see it in research that's done on Canadian opinion versus Canadian actions. And we see that Canadians consistently in the polls are showing that we care about climate change, we care about the environment. But the major barrier to acting on that and taking leadership is not that we don't understand. Our leading barrier is that we think our neighbor is not going to do the same. Understanding does not precede change of habits. It's more influential what your neighbor is doing, what your community members are doing, what your peer pressure is about. And I think that is really very empowering, and also too bad, because it means that we actually have a lot of social influence. So we are all actors in the current culture. We all have ripple effects. It's true. I see this living on Haida Gwaii. I see this because I believe we are all part of a greater Canadian community. And climate change, ultimately, this huge monolithic problem, was created because of all of these little bits that we all contributed to. So let's speed up this change as we engage in these topics on this broader intellectual and political level. Let's pick this up in our personal lives, because that may be one of the most powerful and real things that we can do to affect widespread change. And finally, I want to talk about our human energy for change, for transformation. I was not planning on participating at the UN's Rio Plus 20. 20 years had gone by. I was completely disillusioned with the progress, or the lack of progress, that we saw on making good on the promises that those world representatives made in 1992. And I thought that, it was a lot of carbon to burn just to go to another conference. But 2 years ago, on the eve of the summit, a year before the summit, a troop of young people approached me, and they asked me to join them and to return to Rio again for this 20-year anniversary. And I could not refuse these young, idealistic Canadians calling themselves We Canada. They were volunteers from across the country. And so I want to show you another cute video because it fills me with emotion to watch it.
Canadians. We live in some of the coldest places on the planet.
But we don't huddle inside.
We make ice a national pastime.
Cold.
A source of comfort.
We're home to a guy who ran a few thousand kilometers on one leg.
We built an arm that grabs satellites out of space.
We look at tree sap and think,
That might be great on pancakes.
We put peace before war.
Health before profit.
Us before I.
we before me.
And we always find a way.
Because we can.
And can is Canadian.
The Earth needs Canada.
Because we always find a way.
And now we'll find ways to make a difference.
We can tell a friend.
Talk to a neighbor.
Or email leaders who represent us.
But could do better to reflect us.
We can bring our own mug.
Support fair trade.
Walk instead of drive.
We can design better cities.
Decrease inequality.
Create an economy built to last longer than quarter to quarter.
We can create a better world for our children, so one day they're inspired to create a better one for theirs.
We can be a living, breathing example to the rest of the world.
And we can be the voice of change.
At Earth Summit
2012.
Let's show the world what we can do.
What Canada can do.
We can.
We can.
We can.
We can.
We can.
Canada.
Usually before one of these Earth Summits, our Canadian government has done a survey and consulted with groups from across the country, with educational institutions, with NGOs, with groups that care about sustainability. And from that information, from that research, has compiled a document and has taken that document to the UN as being a building negotiating document, has incorporated it into its negotiating document. But this time, the government decided not to do that process. And so these young volunteers from across Canada decided they were going to conduct this survey. And they took it upon themselves to run a cross-Canada tour and interview over 8,000 Canadians and to get input from all of these people who cared. And from that research, they pulled out 3 main policy recommendations. And these policy recommendations they presented to our government's delegates, confronting them on the values of their constituency and challenging our country to take leadership at the United Nations Earth Summit 2012. The policy recommendations that they developed were idealistic. And these young people who put their energy, money, and hope into making change at the Earth Summit were unbelievably idealistic. And I definitely felt a bit old and cynical watching them. And watching that video, there is something entirely moving in their energy and idealism. Yes, they are idealistic. But also, I realized, engaging with these young people back at the summit where I had been 20 years ago hoping to change the world, I realized that these young people were being absolutely realistic. They look at the world and they see that we are one planet. We are one ecosystem, one globe, completely isolated in the universe. And all that we have is each other. They see that the opportunities of the future depend on developing nations leading and taking responsibility. They see that we depend on an honest and scientific understanding of the interconnections between our society, environment, and economy. The situation was so clear to them as it had been clear to me when I was a child. And they decided to put all their time, their effort, their money into changing our course. And I was totally encouraged and inspired and humbled by these young people who believe that even in the face of so many challenges, in the face of our government undermining our progressive environmental policy, we can be the difference that we want to see in the world. And here lies the inevitability of the transformation of our society. Young people today, young people get it. Young people, those younger than myself, youth, comprise half of this planet's population. They have everything at stake. And as yet, they have very little decision-making power. But they can see clearly that the future is climate change. They can see clearly that the future is depleted ecosystems and wars and disease over scarce water and resources. And they have not invested their lifetimes to the old school ways of doing things. They're not worried about stranded assets. Change is possible for them. In fact, for the youth of today, change is the only viable option. Now, for the last few years, I've noticed that every time I give a formal speech like this, afterwards, someone will inevitably raise their hand and they will ask, how do you remain hopeful? And the hand raisers are often close to despair themselves, or they're just really cynical. Am I hopeful? I'm fiercely hopeful. I think we have got to be fearlessly hopeful. Hope is not naive. Far from it. Hope is a state of desire for a positive outcome, and it comes under duress. Hollywood is shining a spotlight on the history of slavery in the United States right now. And think about a slave. This is the embodiment of human disempowerment. How did they possibly survive? All the cards were stacked against them. Psychologists say hope comes into play when the situation is dire. It is a force that rises up in us, opening us up to be able to imagine a way forward. Today, we all celebrate the life of Nelson Mandela. And his life story is one that makes us proud to be a human being. 20 years into his 27-year incarceration, was Madiba hopeful? Of course he was hopeful. Organizing against entrenched racism in the time of segregation in the US, was Martin Luther King hopeful? Of course he was. Hope is the roadmap to something different. Last year I was at EcoCity and I was able to meet people from all over the world, and I was talking to the mayor of Bonn, Germany, and I asked him whether he was hopeful. And he responded by saying, 2 weeks before the Berlin Wall came down, I was at a conference, and no one at that conference had any idea that this would ever happen. At that time, it was still impossible. Yes, I am hopeful. None of us knows what the future will hold. Even the impossible can happen. Hope is not blind. Hope is actually survival. And it is such a profoundly human characteristic. Hope, this love for life, for the future, This is what has carried us through incredibly dark times. And hope and love are very interconnected. I've never shown a photo of my kids before in a speech that I've given. But today, 22 years after giving a speech as a child, I now, as a parent, I now understand why that speech still is out there, why people are still responding, why that speech, while I've done lots of things in the last 2 decades, that speech remains the most powerful thing I have ever done. It resonates so profoundly because we are reminded of our children, and our children are our embodiment of our hope. The human world is driven by the bottom line. It's driven by profit, by economic forces, because people need to have jobs. But it is also completely driven by an entirely different force. The most powerful force in our human arsenal. The power of love. Love for our children. Canada is a country of possibility. Canadians are a family. We are vast. We are diverse. We are multicultural. And we are complicated. And we are a family. And now we, as a family, need to come together and make sure that the health and security of our children is our greatest hope and the ambition of our nation. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, so we have time for some questions.
There was a Maclean's article with your dad, and it was talking about the failure of the environmental movement. So I just wanted you to maybe comment on what you think maybe some of the failures are.
Great question, and thank you very much. First of all, I want to say that, engaging here in Edmonton and in Alberta and also in Canada, because on the international stage, people see us and we're kind of, I hate to say it, kind of reviled. I saw that, attending UN conferences along the way and seeing the changing international attitude towards Canadians. It's been shocking. And it's very hard. But I think it's, all the more important we have to dig in, and it shows how important this engagement is. So, solidarity. And it's great that you brought up the article in Maclean's. I was actually just talking to my dad about this last night, because I have really been thinking about hope. And this is the first time I've actually talked with an audience about hope, because it's a really tricky thing to think about. And what is hope versus optimism, and what is the attitude that we should be taking? I mean, we can't be naive to the scale of the problems, but what are we going to do? Just, we can't become cynical either, and especially becoming a parent, as I say, your attitude to hope changes. And I talked to my dad. I said, in that article you said, you didn't have hope, and that the environmental movement had failed. And he said, first of all, he didn't say that he didn't have hope. The part where that is conveyed in the article was actually just truncated. It didn't actually have the whole context of what he said, because he's a parent, he's a grandparent, and he absolutely believes of course we have to be hopeful, because we don't know the outcome. We imagine and we have research and we think, but we do not know. And there's time and time again where odds are stacked against you and the impossible happens. But on the failure of environmentalism, he definitely said that. And yet, last night when we were talking about it and we were thinking about, we were exchanging, I was saying, well, how can you say it's failed? I mean, we're not at the end of the story of our environment. This is a long, ongoing story. And who knows, the so-called failure of, maybe the real process is ultimately going to then eventually lead to the right process. I mean, and he was like, oh yeah, you're right. I mean, we never know when something is a failure because, we're not actually at the ultimate end of it. So it was really nice to hear that he recognized that it might not be a failure. And I think that what he was trying to do was just take a step back and say, wow, we've got to do something different. We've got to learn from our attitude and this kind of battling and war language that we've been used to fight the fight and build sustainability that way. And we've got to learn from that. And so in that way, a failure doesn't mean the ultimate end of the story.
Go ahead with the next question.
I'm also from Vancouver and very intrigued by, you said your master's was in the University of Victoria. So my first part of my question is, what is ethnoecology as an enthusiastic undergraduate ecology student? That's my first part. And then as someone who also wants to create a career in spreading the conversation about climate change and finding solutions, how you have developed that out of an ecology or some sort of environmental sciences background?
Great question. So first of all, ethnoecology is kind of a interdiscipline area that is growing, that's kind of anthropology and ecology. And it's a wonderful combination. I'm really glad that right now it seems that in academia there is a really strong trend towards interdisciplinarity. It seems that the reductionist era is kind of over, and now we're getting back to realizing that the world is integrated, and it's in those interstitial spaces, it's in the links that is the really interesting work. So ethnoecology essentially looks at other cultures' versions of ecology, and also how our ecology, how our science can actually corroborate and investigate protocols that traditional societies may have had and show the ecological intelligence behind those protocols. It's a wonderful field. I recommend the writings of Nancy Turner. She's the guru in the movement, and she's at UVic. She's just retiring. But in terms of finding a career that will help this movement, I say whatever you are passionate in, what is your strength, what is your skill set, what you enjoy doing and learning about, that is where you're going to make your mark. And in every way, our current way of living is unsustainable. I mean, pretty much every aspect of our current life. It doesn't mean they're all hard to change, but pretty much anything we do seems to be destructive. So that means in every sector, in every area, in every way, we need to start building those solutions. And finally, I'd say to you, we need young people and we need scientists to speak up. We need you to use your voice. If I have learned anything from this whole Rio speech phenomenon from 20 years ago, it is that the world is hungry for hearing truth spoken to power. We need more young people to speak that, because youth can speak it in a way that nobody else can. You have the most at stake, and we need more female voices. We need more diversity in the conversation. We need more young people and more women to speak up. And those will be powerful elements for change.
In Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, he actually brings up quite a similar theme that you brought up tonight, on whether or not change starts from the bottom up, from small grassroots and completely anonymous, or from the top down, a centralized force that goes on and makes a law. I think both have massive obstacles. I mean, from the top, we talk about changing our energy sector, but that would also mean changing our political sector, because I mean, let's be honest. I mean, a lot of these parties are propagated by the energy sector and the funding from that. But from the bottom up, there's even a bigger obstacle. I mean, materialism and consumerism, it's not just a fad. It's thoroughly ingrained in who we are. And it's become thoroughly ingrained in who we are. I mean, a law and a piece of paper is pretty easy to sign, but changing an ideology is very difficult to do. I mean, like, on the radio, all you hear is, songs about, Oakleys and driving an Escalade, I mean, what do you, like, from your approach, because in my opinion, we don't have a lot of time, and we need to figure out a way, and one of these ways has to do it, and they both have a gaping hole in them.
I think that there's many ways of doing it, and we haven't exactly even identified the avenues for social change. It's going to be both top down and bottom up, but it's also going to be sideways and upside down. And social media, what is that doing? Is it making us more self-absorbed, or is it actually connecting us more to each other? Well, it's doing both. I mean, all of these things they're not either or, it's and. And through that, we are at once, more materialistic, and we're also more aware and more connected to other people on the planet than we ever have before. We have more access to information, which is an incredible power, and yet we fritter away our time and this power, with all kinds of meaningless activities. We're human. And so I think that, we have to keep positive, we have to keep aware, we have to address our consumerism in a major way. And one of the main ways that we have to do this, I think, is we have to have a conversation about wealth. We have to have a conversation that defines what we're talking about when we're talking about wealth. Because right now, what our concept of wealth is based on is not conducive at all to health, to a sense of belonging, to the wellness of our environment, to our quality of life. And I think through a conversation about wealth and quality of life, which ultimately will fit with a lot of people who are, we are in a very individualistic society and a materialistic society. We can talk about quality of life and how it's going to benefit me. But ultimately, I think this gets at an even deeper conversation, which is what makes us happy as human beings, and what are our true values. And through that conversation, I think we can start to actually talk about these issues and the reality that consuming more isn't making us happier. It's actually, there's studies showing that more money over a certain amount and more stuff actually has a negative relationship. So I think, all of those realities are true. We have huge challenges. All of these answers are interconnected, and no one answer is going to be the be-all and end-all. But one thing we really have to do is engage in a serious conversation and definition of wealth. And even though, because I like to talk, even though we are totally materialistic and this kind of consumerism is now really embedded in the way we are still so social, and we really care what other people think. And I've even felt, when I drive to some event and a friend of mine bikes or does something really cool like skis there, or I feel that. I'm like, oh, I could have biked, or maybe next time I'm gonna actually fix my rat trap and get it all set up so that next time I will. And there's that strong sense that is hardwired into our DNA to be part of the pack. And we can use that and be receptive to that. And I think it's something we have underestimated.
I'm a third-year genetics student here at the U of A, just finishing off an undergrad degree, and one of the main themes of your speech that really kind of stuck with me is hope, and specifically having hope even when the scenario or the situation seems very dire or even impossible. And the reason that strikes a chord with me is I look at our education system, and specifically I look at our post-secondary institutions. And you look at some of the trends which are just seriously damaging in so many ways. And one of the main things, or one of the main themes of academia that has been very prevalent, especially as of late, is talking about how inhospitable academic research is. And much of it has been tied to the growing cahoots between corporations and post-secondary institutions. So I just look at this, and I look around, and I feel like our education in post-secondary institutions is profit-driven. And when I look at a theme like International Week 2014, creating solutions for a healthier world, I think that's a theme that can be tied to almost any job you get here at the University of Alberta. So I feel like that is a theme that should be kind of carried across throughout whatever education you're getting. But instead, since it's so profit-driven, it really, as a student, it leaves me hopeless. And I've talked to professors, I've talked to researchers who have similar feelings and sentiments about this. So to me, this seems like a dire situation, and truly I've investigated it, and it's hard for me to stay hopeful. And I was just wondering, is there any sort of trend that can kind of help me or help motivate me or mobilize my peers along with myself to try and stay hopeful and see if there is a way to try and actually have motivations to create solutions for a healthy world and not just kind of have our jobs and fulfill our materialistic desires?
Intense question. I think that we really have to nurture those of us who've decided that we want to make this world a better place. It's really hard. And what we have to do is surround ourselves by role models, by mentors. You got to read all you can by people that inspire you. And through just encouraging and reinforcing the voices that are saying what you agree with and what you believe in and what you want to perpetuate, I believe we are creating culture. And I made a list the other day of all of the individuals and institutions that I respect. And they started out, they're all kind of the typical radical and the more activist institutions. But then I started listing a couple businesses. And then I started listing a couple groups that are on that interface, that are built by individuals who they completely believed in changing the world, and they wanted to take it into the business sector. I'm going to Japan to do a speaking tour with the Namakemono Club, the Sloth Club, and they have a totally different relationship with business than we do here in North America. In Japan, the whole identity and culture around business goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. It's very connected to family. You have families that have very old family lineages where you have generations of family businesses being passed down. Sony is one of them. And they have very strong ethics about giving back to the community. Why is it that today, being a business person seems to equate, in someone who's socially minded and socially aware, why does that equate that you destroy? I think we've created a climate, especially in North America, where this is true. But we have so many different histories of different economic forms in the past. We will always need companies. We will always need to consume. We're consumers. We're animals. We will always need food, clothing, shelter, all of these things. There will always be economies that we depend on. And we have to start reimagining the possibility and take ourselves out of this little blip in time that is unsustainable, because there are so many examples of other eras, other paradigms. Right now, we're just so embedded in this one that is so dominating, so globalized. And that is unique. It's pretty huge, but we really have to look at the diverse past and the people that are talking about these things. So take care of that hope. Nurture it, grow it, surround yourself. Think about, I feel like it's almost too easy in a way to talk about people like Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King or Gandhi and all these classic figures, but they are essential to our story about who we are as human beings, and to the story of what our possibilities are in the face of great injustice and great trial.
So throughout my studies and also in my current work in conservation and sustainable resource development, I've found that one of the major stumbling blocks to constructive dialogue and constructive work is this us versus them mentality, how we pit the environment against the economy. And I find that a lot of times dialogue goes down to rhetoric, people become very polarized, and it's really difficult to bring people back to a more moderate and level plane to talk about these real issues and how to move forward on them. And I was wondering how you would address this mentality that's holding us back. and that's stopping us from having a paradigm shift to more sustainable living?
You have completely hit the nail on the head, and we have to figure that out. How are we going to work together? And I've been thinking about this a lot because I live in this small community. I live on a reservation. We have a lot of challenges, and we have to work together to be able to achieve the goals that everybody agrees we need, but nobody agrees to how we get there. And we have to start figuring exactly that out. We have to start learning about conflict resolution. We have to start learning how you facilitate dialogue. There are experts in this. There are people who their whole job is to go and help groups of humans who have a problem try to negotiate and see how they're, maybe might be able to work together and how they do move forward. I recently heard from a man, Adam Kahane, his whole career has been about conflict resolution and facilitation of a group of people who are a community but disagree with each other, moving forward towards a common goal. And he's written several books. He has a theory that all of our dynamics hinge between power and love, a power and love dynamic, and I think that's one of the names of his book, Power and Love. And one of the first areas of conflict that he worked in was in post-apartheid South Africa. He was invited as a young man, just kind of new in this area. He was invited to South Africa after they had gotten rid of apartheid, and all of a sudden they had to deal with living together and forming a government and a democracy and all these things that were almost an impossibility. And so it was his role to sit with people in a room and try to get them to even sit there in the same room together. And so it is possible, but we have to become experts in how to figure out how we talk to each other.
I guess everyone has consumer dollars. Okay, we all, like you said, we all consume. Now, I guess I've been kind of paying more attention to some corporations. You touched on companies that are gearing towards sustainability. Like, I guess I saw a TED talk that IKEA is lining their roofs with solar panels. Tesla with their Tesla Motors with their car. How do you see that being more mainstream, and do you see like almost government intervention to give some incentives? I know some states and provinces do they'll incentivize some purchases like that to try to transfer some of our consumer dollars towards corporations that are actually being sustainable and helping out, maybe incentivizing to eat organic and to help out with that side of things. Do you see any thoughts?
You're wearing a tie, so I bet you are probably more of an expert on how the market can help shift towards social responsibility. I'm kind of kidding. I think that we all need to become experts in the fields in which we are interested and getting educated and pursue these avenues exactly. And in terms of the market shift towards sustainability, I think that it's a spectrum. And like anything, there's been this debate, do we work with corporations to help them get, like Walmart. Walmart has some green initiatives, has some sustainability initiatives, and it has such incredible buying power that it is able to actually transform, working conditions and all kinds of things. But then, it doesn't pay its workers fair wages, and it's got all kinds of problems as well. So they're not perfect, of course. No one is. Plus, they're still based in a paradigm that is based on economic growth as, the ends, as the continuous, never-ending goal. And that also is very flawed. But does that mean we don't work with Walmart? Of course not. It's going to be all kinds of imperfect, small, different, buckshot instead of silver bullet type answers that are going to get us at least somewhere forward. And along the way, those paradigms are going to, or the mini paradigms are going to shift. I mean, I was amazed to read Tim Flannery talk about being optimistic when he was just dismissed as the chief scientist with the Climate Commission after the right-wing government got in and dismantled the whole commission in Australia. And yet he is totally optimistic because of the changes he's seeing in the market. All of a sudden renewables are, and I've heard Al Gore say this as well, no one anticipated the growth that renewables have had, and the price is starting to come down. So, those kinds of discussions about, when the demand rises and the costs fall, those are starting to have reverberations. We need to pursue all of those answers, and then along the way we're going to recalibrate and reevaluate and start moving in another direction. So that's my kind of an answer, but I think you can find the best answers for yourself.
So I'm currently working on an online course through Growing Insights, which is also facilitated through the Alberta Professional Planners Institute. And one of my first modules is the whole course is on urban agriculture. And the first module was talking about entrepreneurs. And one of the questions was talking about an entrepreneur that comes to the city and says, I want to get a license for an urban agricultural business. So I'm a professional planner, and I look at zoning bylaws all the time. And so the first thing I did was look at the land use bylaw. Are they permitted in residential zones? No, they're not. Yet in Edmonton, we have a lot of policies in the whole way we, like the way we green, the way we grow, all the way series. There's policies to support urban agriculture. And I know that Vancouver, for instance, they have very strict regulations in their zoning bylaws on green development and how they're going to promote that. So I can see how that ends up being like a very good best practice, but I want to know what your thoughts were on land use bylaws and specific regulations for helping promote green development.
I don't have education in this background, so I think that, once again, I think you're probably much more knowledgeable than I, but we're going to have to make a lot of changes with our bylaws and with our, with the way that the current system is run. Right now, where I live in Haida Gwaii, we have to import all of our vegetables and import meat. We have regular grocery stores; they're just highly expensive. But we are very wealthy in seafood. So commercially, we don't have what we used to have, and the fishing industry is not at all what it once was. But still, we can fish for ourselves and mostly eat from the land and sea all year round. My family, we don't buy any protein because we're harvesting it all ourselves. My husband's a hunter, and we fish all year long. So that's incredible. And there are several little restaurant establishments. We have, I think, 3 restaurants nearby that we can go to. It's very exciting. But none of these restaurants can serve local fish or local deer meat. And this is because of the regulations around food that we have. And it means that they have to import food, and they sell us a poor, not as quality product. So these are things you can see. Our community wants to build a sustainability plan. We want to have a strategy, and you can see that there's all these different regulations in place before we even get to the work of making that a reality. So it's very complicated, and every community, I say, you know better than I, but ultimately we are going to have to be experts in our own communities and in our own domains, because no one else is going to be those experts, and that's part of, becoming more accountable and responsible to the change.
So if business and the environment can get along, after all, then how would you, let's say, sell this idea to those people like, say, Rona Ambrose or the Sauder School of Business in UBC?
What would I do? I would cite companies that are doing this and companies that are thriving. People respond to entrepreneurs and people who are contributing to the economy. And there now are examples of companies that are doing that are still working for the earth as well as to their shareholders. I think, like I said, there's a wide spectrum of opinions and opportunities for shifting the economy. There's going to be people working within the current growth paradigm, and there are going to be people who are advocating, triple bottom line, where you have social responsibility, environmental responsibility, and responsibility to your shareholders. And now that's becoming more and more mainstream. This winter's Corporate Nights, which is a corporate magazine but focuses on sustainability and social responsibility in corporations, they have, almost the whole edition is dedicated to profiling the success of these triple bottom line companies. So selling that idea, I think, is beginning to really gather steam and becoming more of an influencer on business as usual. But then you have the rest of the spectrum, and you have economists who are calling for a steady state economy. People who are not so marginal anymore. They're, professors, they're economists, and Jeff Rubin, who was the chief economist at CIBC, and they're talking for a totally different economic paradigm. And so I think there's like an entrance level, and then you have your kind of more extreme, but it's all part of a very important conversation. And I would start Roan off with the entrance level dialogue.